This week on CrunchWeek, we're talking about big valuations from Uber and Houzz and all the news coming out of WWDC. Hi, welcome to CrunchWeek. I'm Leena Rao.
I'm Colleen.
I'm Kyle.
Big news from Uber this week. The funding was actually closed, $1.2 billion apparently from Fidelity and a number of other investors. Actually, Kleiner, it seemed like, was a new investor too. And then what was really sort of staggering was the $18 billion plus valuation that came out of that company.
This is one of the things where you could always say Uber is raising a lot of money at a much bigger valuation than last time, and you'll always be right, even if you don't even have any sources.
Right.
Show me that if you had that story at any time in the past year, you were proven correct at some point, because it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. It was only a few months ago that it was a $10 billion valuation. Now they're at $18 billion post-money.
You know, it's just, what's crazy about it is that they're not, you know, I saw a Q&A with Travis, and he's not interested in going public, or at least that's what he's saying publicly. Like, he's not, that's not on his mind. He wants to build a company. You know, he's still interested in growing and expanding, and now they have like this logistical feature that they're doing more with. But I mean, it's kind of amazing. I mean, you think about the companies that go public at those valuations, like there are a lot of them. I mean, so it's interesting that they're staying private.
I think it's amazing how the extent to which they seem to be in control of their own destiny too, that they're the ones pushing the valuations and the numbers they're raising. And also, like, this is all, the reason they're able to raise so much and like continuously is because like people just assume that like the issues they're having with like opposition from the taxi lobby, for instance, that they'll just barrel through it.
Yeah.
And like they just seem to be skating along through those issues just by themselves, and then, you know, like that's not a concern for investors, it seems.
That's definitely an important thing, and I think that's why, even though we can say this is an IPO kind of number, this is a public company market cap size. It's bigger than a lot of public companies, but there's still so much risk there because Uber still has a lot of regulatory question marks. So I think that's why it's not a public company yet.
Right.
This wouldn't be a safe company for you to put your mutual fund money in. It's definitely still a risk. So these investors are taking a risk, and then private market investors like risk.
Well, I mean, you talk about the regulatory environment. I mean, you had, I guess, this past week, an article come out where someone from the San Francisco Taxi Commission, there was a commentary around how one owner of a taxi company basically was saying that, Uber is going to get rid of taxis in San Francisco, and that will eventually happen. I mean, you have to think that if that's the sentiment now, or if people are actually thinking those thoughts inside the taxi industry, there's definitely this revolution happening, and maybe, the regulatory hurdles are, I don't know, something will happen where they'll be a little bit, appeased in some way.
That's scary to me in some ways. I take Uber, I use Uber often to call cabs. You can still call taxis on Uber. Yeah. I think competition is really important. It would be scary if all of the myriad taxi companies in each city went away, and then Uber is the one dominant thing.
And Lyft, though.
And Lyft, yeah. If these things are the two dominant companies, I think that there still needs to be a lot of competition, at least for the next couple of years. I worry about this turning into something like what happened with bookstores. Remember there used to be a lot of independent bookstores, and then out came Barnes & Noble and Borders with like big money and investors and private equity, and they put all the little guys out of business, but then it turned out they were too big, they kind of toppled, they weren't sustainable, and then we were left with kind of no bookstores,
we're
period.
Left with Amazon.
And Amazon, which, it's just a different market.
Yeah.
It actually reminds me of the Apple-Amazon book situation where, the courts or, the legal system's going to have to deal with kind of, when you're talking about regulation like this, are you talking about like consumer safety, what's better for consumers as far as like this app provides a better customer service, that's why people use it so much. And, are people going to be on the side of taxi companies because that's like the old system and the way everyone knows, and those people, like, they want to keep their jobs and their companies? Or are we going to side with, hey, millions of people all around the country are using this, like, let's tear down the walls to like having to expand more?
Well, and with this new funding, apparently they're going to reduce rates by another 20%. So I don't know what that's going to do to the market or the other, competitors in the industry. We'll see.
Yeah.
Also want to talk about Houzz and their big funding this week. What'd you think about that?
Houzz, Houzz. It's something that I think a lot of people out there use. It's not so buzzed about in the tech industry, but it's something that's very mainstream. It's like a home decor site. It's good to see. I mean, Houzz is an interesting company. It's a female-led company, as you've mentioned.
Adi Tatarko, yeah, she's wonderful. Yeah,
right.
Really smart woman.
I think a lot of eyebrows were raised at how big that round was.
Yeah,
though.
2.3 billion?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so it was, I think it was like 150 million at a 2.3 billion valuation. You know, I have to think that there's something they're seeing with engagement across a really wide variety of people, not just our inner circle tech people, that's pointing people towards that. And also, I don't see a lot of other clear-cut competitors there. You know, there isn't a rivalry. I know Zillow's trying to get into it, and there's a few other small startups, but Houzz seems to be the relative leader in the space when it comes to this.
And Houzz is one company that, for a long time, they really didn't raise a lot of outside funding. They were bootstrapped. They were profitable. This is something that Adi Tatarko has talked about a lot. And so I kind of like the approach that they've taken to their business. And in some ways, Uber is different, but Uber also has really strong revenue, a lot of growth. They can come to the table with investors and demand good terms. They don't need the money right now. Houzz is the same way. I think that's what we're seeing with these two monster rounds this week.
So I'll be honest, I was one of the people who I was surprised. I've never really heard of Houzz, maybe like mentioned on TechCrunch before. But for the most part, I was pretty much unaware of what Houzz was doing. And then all of a sudden, this multi-billion-dollar valuation. What do you guys think is the reason behind why it kind of was able to fly under the radar?
I don't think they actually are looking to kind of be out there that much. I mean, I think that if I think about like all my Facebook friends who like join Houzz, it's like similar to the way it started with Pinterest.
Right.
Whereas I think Pinterest did get a lot more kind of traction from the technology world, maybe because of Ben or maybe because of some of the investor that they had. But you know, I remember Pinterest was really exciting to people outside of technology before it was exciting to people inside of
Very
technology. True. And so I think that's why Houzz has gone relatively under the radar. But you know, everyone that uses it really enjoys it, and so I think we'll see. I mean, you know, how far they can go with that valuation, I'm curious. But I use it.
Yeah, I use it. I just started using it this past week because I'm redecorating my apartment, and I started using this thing. And it's something that you don't get until you start using it.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to run out of time before talking about one of our really big stories from the past week, which is WWDC and all the news coming out of the Apple Developer Conference. Kyle, what did you think about that stuff?
So I think the two big stories coming out of WWDC are that Apple is shifting its idea of what the digital hub is in your life from iCloud to the iPhone in particular. In 2001, Steve Jobs talked about the Mac as the digital hub strategy. And then 2011, at his last WWDC keynote, he talked about how he was shifting that to, or the company was shifting to iCloud, where everything will just be there for you, and your PC or your iPad will just be a screen to get to it. And I think that based on recent trends, Apple is reconsidering what it thinks about that. I think that like if you look at Facebook usage, for instance, there are more people who only use services like Facebook on phones than only use services on like their laptop. So I think a lot of that behavior Apple's starting to recognize and distribute it across its entire ecosystem now, where things like HouseKit and HealthKit and CarPlay, your phone is with you all the time, so it's the center of your life, and especially your digital life. And because of things like sensors and wearables, like keeping track of every aspect of your life, the iPhone is a perfect place to keep as like the organizer, the manager for all of those things.
Is it too little, too late?
I actually think that by making it such a big focus for iOS itself, and by providing so many tools that developers will like, by not only like putting them out there, but unlike in previous years, using them itself. In previous years, iCloud and iCloud for developers were two separate things. Matt Panzarino wrote about that last year. And I think that they're kind of reshaping the story where people or developers were already building apps under, mobile first has been a thing for a couple years now. They were already developing under that mindset, but now there's just more tools to build from that idea.
Well, I mean, speaking of developers, what did you think of Swift? I mean, that's a whole new programming language. It seemed like it made a lot of waves in the blogosphere per se.
So Swift is interesting because I've been reading through the book that they released about it. It's like 900 pages, so I'm not that far yet. But it doesn't necessarily change a lot about the developer ecosystem. It still is relying on the same compiler and runtime and libraries that people have already been using with Objective-C, but it's a lot cleaner. It's a lot easier. Basically, the guy who started the project, he said that he wants to not only have it be adopted by developers, but also change the way that computer science is taught, which is kind of a big goal for like kind of a niche, not even product released from Apple.
Does it make it a bit more accessible? Is that the idea?
Yeah, what's interesting is, and I tweeted about this the other day, where this new part of Xcode called Playgrounds lets you actually write up code and see what you're making as it happens. And the example they gave on stage was making like a game where you can literally like change aspects of the physics or the animation and see it happen in real time. Whereas before it was, compile, run, send to an iOS simulator or your device, oh, that works or doesn't work. And it's a lot more intuitive to develop when you can see exactly how you're doing, like what you're doing is shaping.
Right.
And I think it'll be interesting to see how that gets, actually put into the educational tools. Like Stanford, for instance, has a library that you can subscribe to through iTunes that's really popular about learning like iOS development. And to make that like actually an interactive tutorial that anyone can download, that's going to be really interesting to see like who's making apps in a year.
Yeah, for sure. Well, hopefully we'll see some interesting developments in the next few months. And then, of course, everyone's waiting for the new iPhone, right?
I guess so.
Are you going to make the switch?
I'm still an Android user, so some of this stuff is over my head, although I use Mac. I don't know.
We'll see.
I don't know.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching, and tune in next week.